fine. It's a belief system. He's allowed to believe it, and people are allowed to vote for it. But if liberals deny it, like he's just going through a goth phase, they're going to lose more elections. This is not a communist country. It turned one of Latin America's richest countries into one of its poorest. Low wages, high inflation, shortages, outages, 8 million people fleeing. If you think New York can somehow reinvent this wheel, you're in for a rude awakening. Zoran can't make your wishes come true. You're thinking of Zoltar.
It's finally happening. Bill Maher says he's exposing the real reason the Democratic Party's strategy keeps falling apart. With the ongoing ICE controversy dominating headlines, you'd think the DNC would be gaining ground. Instead, poll numbers are sliding. Why? Maher claims he knows the answer, and he says it's going to surprise a lot of Americans. If you're ready for bold, unfiltered political analysis, hit that subscribe button and let's jump straight into it.
Let me tell you about the story that liberal algorithms locked out. Her name is Sia Weaver, and if you ask anyone in the blue sky bubble who that is, they'll look at you like a turkey looking up at the rain. But she's kind of important in New York, being Major Mamdani's chief of the Office to Protect Tenants, and since Mamdani's big issue is the rent's too damn high, yes, he stole this guy's act. It's a very key appointment in the most important city in the country, which is also our financial center. It matters that the mayor stands by, and so I assume stands with, someone who says things like, if you don't believe in the government's sacred right to seize private property, it's over. Seize private property. Home ownership is racist. Elect more communists.
Maher begins by targeting what he calls the party's uncomfortable drift toward the far left. He argues this isn't just campaign talk. It's messaging that many voters interpret as leaning towards socialism. Critics respond that one outspoken figure doesn't define an entire national party. But Maher pushes back, saying the issue is bigger than one politician. He points to New York City as more than just another policy playground. It's the financial heartbeat of the United States and a global symbol of capitalism. What happens there shapes national perception. And if voters believe America's biggest economic engine is turning socialist, Maher warns that perception alone could reshape how the entire party is viewed nationwide.
Private property, especially home ownership, is a weapon of white supremacy. Really? Even among the 20 million black Americans who own their own home? I mean, these are the kind of utterances I might forgive as something a dumb white girl said while she was at Bryn Mawr. Because it's the kind of privilege hating you can only learn for $95,000 a year. But these are statements made as an adult. Yes, for co-eds from elite private colleges, you're only a lesbian until graduation, but the communism lasts a lifetime.
Maher argues the Democratic strategy is imploding for one politically explosive reason. Many Americans instinctively recoil at anything that sounds like communism. The label itself triggers alarm bells. For millions of voters, it brings up fears of government overreach, economic decline, and lost freedoms. Fair or not, Maher says ignoring that reaction is political malpractice. Generations grew up during the Cold War defining America in opposition to centralized economic control. So when rhetoric even loosely echoes those themes, anxiety follows. Dismissing those concerns as ignorance, he argues, only widens the divide. And if voters connect Democratic messaging to failed socialist experiments of the past, the fallout could be swift and self-inflicted.
Democrats seem to be having this debate whether or not Mayor Mamdani is a socialist or a democratic socialist. Let me settle it. He's a straight-up communist. How do I know this? Well, I'm reading between the lines when one of his major advisors says, elect more communists.
Maher insists that openly socialist branding from high-profile figures damages the broader Democratic image. In his view, this isn't about one platform, it's about optics. When a prominent Democrat embraces policies widely labeled socialist or communist, opponents seize the narrative and paint the entire party with it. That framing, Maher says, carries a steep political price. What surprises him most is that even many millennials aren't automatically on board. Younger voters may lean progressive, but they're also pragmatic about jobs, inflation, and economic opportunity. If policies appear risky or extreme, enthusiasm cools quickly. Elevating figures like Mandani, Maher argues, gives critics ammunition to brand the DNC as too far left, and once that label sticks, reversing it becomes an uphill battle.
Fine, it's a belief system. He's allowed to believe it, and people are allowed to vote for it. But if liberals deny it, like he's just going through a goth phase, they're going to lose more elections. This is not a communist country.
Maher's warning isn't just opinion. It's become a broader media conversation. On Real Time with Bill Maher, he described Zoran Mandani as a straight-up communist and cautioned that Democrats risk losing elections if they ignore how that label plays with voters. And polling suggests the branding battle matters. While some Democrats have warmed to socialist ideas, national surveys still show most Americans prefer capitalism. Among Republicans especially, socialism remains a deeply negative term. America isn't Venezuela, and most voters don't want economic instability anywhere near U.S. soil. If Democratic leaders allow opponents to define them as radical without pushback, Maher argues, the political cost could show up as soon as 2028.
Turned one of Latin America's richest countries into one of its poorest. Low wages, high inflation, shortages, outages, 8 million people fleeing. If you think New York can somehow reinvent this wheel, you're in for a rude awakening. Zoran can't make your wishes come true. You're thinking of Zoltar.
Maher references Venezuela's economic collapse as a cautionary tale. Once one of Latin America's wealthiest nations, it endured a prolonged economic breakdown. Today, Venezuela's GDP sits around $120 billion, a fraction of the nearly $29 trillion U.S. economy. That contrast is stark. America's economic strength drives innovation, jobs, and global leadership, built on democratic institutions and diversified markets. Venezuela's crisis, marked by shortages and collapsing living standards, followed heavy state intervention and centralized control. Maher's point isn't that America is Venezuela. It's that drifting too far from market-based principles can carry serious political and economic consequences.
Democratic socialism is like a dating profile. Things look great until you meet up in the real world. For example, Bernie Sanders, his big thing was always bringing single-payer health care to our country of 340 million. But when liberal, tie-dyed Vermont tried to do it for a population of 626,000, it collapsed like that poor in the Oval Office last week. Bernie, AOC, Mandani are not Democrats. They'll be the first to tell you that. They're democratic socialists, and that's a very different thing, and I don't think people know that yet.
Maher says he's simply calling it as he sees it. In his view, figures like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Bernie Sanders don't fit the traditional Democratic mold. He argues they operate under the party banner while advancing a more ideological agenda. Whether the DNC officially endorses that direction is debatable, but Maher suggests the lack of strong internal pushback sends a message. When rhetoric drifts toward democratic socialism or sweeping economic restructuring, silence from party leadership can amplify perception. And in politics, perception often shapes reality just as much as policy.
People realize we already have a lot of socialism. Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, unemployment insurance, food stamps, veterans benefits, Pell Grants, COVID-era payments, farm subsidies, disability payments, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, corporate bailouts, and the jobs program that is building weapons the Pentagon doesn't even want. All that is socialism, much of it appropriate to soften the edges of capitalism, but the DSA are radicals about this concept, and radical economic policy is always ineluctably married to radical social policy. Their platform, for example, calls for completely open borders. They're for what Biden was doing but more.
Maher also acknowledges a more nuanced reality. American democracy already includes programs some might call socialist, like public schools, Social Security, Medicare, and infrastructure spending. The U.S. blends market capitalism with targeted safety nets. His argument isn't that every collective policy is dangerous. It's that there's a line between balance and overhaul. Moving toward a full-scale socialist framework, he argues, risks destabilizing the economic engine that fuels growth and innovation. While socialism may sound appealing on paper, promising fairness and security, implementation is complex. Incentives shift, bureaucracy expands, and efficiency can suffer. Dramatic structural change, he warns, may carry unintended consequences.
Masking 2-year-olds who never would have died from it and keeping schools closed for far too long. They're definitely afraid of their kids, who from time immemorial have always come up with bad ideas. Their kids, thinking up stupid shit is what they do. But parents used to tell them, that's ridiculous. The world doesn't work that way. Not today's parents. They say, you're right, honey. Gender is just a social construct. Please, sometimes your mother and I forget which one of us has.
Maher circles back to what he believes was the party's earlier miscalculation, leaning heavily into what critics call woke politics. He argues cultural battles and ideological purity tests alienated middle-of-the-road voters in past elections. Instead of recalibrating, he sees some factions pushing even further left, this time economically. Doubling down, he says, risks shrinking the coalition rather than expanding it. Elections are typically won in the center, not on ideological extremes. If Democrats misread public frustration as a demand for more radical change instead of pragmatic reform, Maher warns they could repeat past mistakes, with even higher stakes next time.
I don't know if we're still banning TikTok. That was before we changed the rule in America to Trump decides what's a law. But I know it wouldn't even be an issue if parents would sack up and tell their kids to get off the f***ing phone. Democrats are still afraid of the mean girls who police their far-out fringe. Massachusetts Congressman Seth Moulton had a perfect score on LGBTQ issues from the Human Rights Campaign. But when he said, I have 2 little girls, I don't want them getting run over on a playing field by a male or formerly male athlete, his own campaign manager quit.
In the end, Maher's message is simple. Perception is everything. Political branding can define or derail a party. He believes Democrats are flirting with labels that make a large share of Americans uneasy. Whether it's progressive cultural messaging, the rise of outspoken democratic socialists, or reluctance to distance from communist rhetoric, he sees a pattern that could prove costly. His broader point isn't about rejecting reform. It's about political reality. America has long balanced social programs with a strong capitalist backbone. When voters sense that balance tipping too far, they react. If the DNC doesn't adjust how its message lands beyond its base, moderates and independents could decide the outcome. Adapt to the electorate, Maher warns, or risk learning the same lesson again at the ballot box. And that wraps up today's video. If you found this breakdown valuable, hit like and subscribe for more in-depth political analysis.